I am very happy to welcome you to the fourth edition of Critical Symposium, convening on the theme of temporal planes. My name is Tony, and I'm the organizer and facilitator of the symposium. So we are an arts-based research forum that assembles virtually each month around various themes with multidisciplinary practitioners to support interdisciplinary dialogue, provide an experimental space to test ideas, and foster collaboration, not only among artists and scholars, but also between theory and practice, however we define that. So previously, in the past sessions, we have explored themes such as choreographic practices, politics and poetics of care, and haptic tendencies. And even though we meet on seemingly distinctive critical concepts each month, what excites me in every session is how each one in some ways seem to be a sort of continuation of the ideas and thoughts brought forward in the previous session. So today I'm very excited to see how the discussions on temporality might even connect to previous themes such as care, haptics, and choreography. So for today's session, we are fortunate to have three talented speakers: Hazel Yizhuo Jiao, Lauric Mahé-Stephenson, and Eileen White. Hazel is an interdisciplinary artist based in London, working around the intersection of modern human beings and technology. Lauric is an artist and filmmaker based between Paris and London, exploring ideas of queer identity and monstrosity. And Eileen is based in the UK and works within the expanded field of print, site-specific installation, and artist book that are an entanglement of history, temporality, and nature. So today's forum will run for 90 minutes from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. GMT, and speakers will respond to the theme for 15 minutes each, after which we will engage in an informal dialogue about temporality as well as the ideas that the speakers bring forth. So since the forum is open to everyone is encouraged to participate if they wish to. So without taking up too much time, I think we can begin with the presentations. So we'll start with Hazel, followed by then Lauric and Eileen. So Hazel, are you ready to start?
Yes, thank you, Tony. I'm going to share my screen. Cool. Can everyone see this? Yeah, cool. Hi, I'm Hazel. I graduated from the RCA in 2023 from contemporary art practice from the moving image pathway. And yeah, I have always worked predominantly with moving image, which is a time-based medium. So yeah, so this is gonna be wait, sorry. Yes, so I will start with a quote from a poem I really like about, I think it will lead nicely to talking about my practice. So time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. What might have been is an abstraction, remaining a perpetual possibility, only in a world of speculation. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. So in my practice, I use time is, sorry, I was just getting my notes ready and it was taking a long time. Okay, cool. So I feel like, to me, moving image as a medium is in a sense the constructing and also destructing of time and worlds. And I use moving image to create a sort of non-linear and a circular time, and I think it kind of relates to this image. It's an Ouroboros. It's from a medieval manuscript of a serpent devouring its own tail, and I think it leads to this work that are kind of like the most recent completed body of work that I made, which is for the degree show in 2023 in Truman Brewery. So this is the installation review. It consisted of a 14-minute film, and then some bottles and the print. I will talk about them in detail. So in this work, in this film, it's called Incarnation Fighter Max X. You can see at the bottom of the screen. It talks about this. It's told through the perspective of a 2,000-year-old Thuja tree, which is a real tree near a temple in the city where I grew up in northern China. And it's kind of looking through the different lives, different incarnations of this tree from different perspectives. It's a chapter-based film, and it's kind of like a time traveling process. So maybe if I show the video at the background with the sound muted. Sorry, I'm going to mute the sound for this. Cool. Yes, so the first chapters, it started with a kind of deep time, an ancient time, tracing back to the sort of the genetic links between the tree genes and the human genes and the similarities of them, kind of tracing back to this shared deep temporality that we don't experience in our day-to-day presence. And it connects to, this tree has a lot of, the Thuja tree, which is a type of, I should have said, it's a type of cypress tree. And it's very present in a lot of ancient Chinese mythologies, which is also talked about in the film. In one of the myths that's discussed in this film, the leaves of this tree is grinded up into a fine powder, which eventually became the elixir of longevity, which made this Tian Luan, which is the protagonist of this mythology story, to be immortal. And yes, so that's like the ancient plane that this tree existed on, and this actual tree that actually still lives near where they're back home in China. As you can see in the first chapter, it was 2,000 years old, and it stood through a lot of tests in history. And for example, it was during the Cultural Revolution in China in the 60s, it was carved by the letters carved on the tree trunk, and which is still present to this day. And I feel like it speaks really beautifully to this kind of how the time scale and the experience and the presentation of time in the modern human world, and how that bears witness to human intervention and human history. It's kind of it's ever present in the very transient events of human intervention. And also, so a lot of the imagery in this film is actually generated by AI. It was made sort of in late 2022, early 2023, when sort of this AI image generation was still it's not as sort of perfect as it is today. And I feel like in my work, I've always been interested in this digital representation of nature, this digital gaze we have on nature. It's kind of, to me, recreating the modern human world via a machine language. It's a kind of displacement of the temporality, sorry. And it is kind of, this is a byproduct of a kind of mechanical time, a weaponized and uniform time, which is the byproduct of the capitalist mode of production. And I feel like this kind of links to both the literal and symbolic violence committed to the modern human world by techno-capitalism. And yes, so as you can see in this part, it's kind of an interlude where the holistic this kind of holistic use of this tree in ancient mythology and ancient herbal medicine book is replaced by a kind of extracted, objectified view of this plant via mass production, via uniformity. So I suppose it's so this part, sorry, this part is about this book, which is like more than 1,000 years old, where the Suja tree was first mentioned to be of medicinal use. And yes, so I guess I'll jump through to the next work. Oh, maybe I'll show you this part again. So this, in the installation, this bottle is, I actually have it right here. Yes, so it's it's a little bottle made with the fictional name of this plant, and inside it has some leaves. It's not from the actual 2,000-year tree, but it's from the same family of this tree. And I feel like it's a very interesting contrast between this kind of very scientific classification of this plant and this kind of rigid division of this being and in contrast to the different rich lives, the messy, unruly lives that it had in its other existence. This is not sure how I'm doing on time. And this is a quote I think that really speaks beautifully to this film. So in existential mathematics, that experience takes the form of two basic equations. The degree of slowness is directly proportional to the intensity of memory. The degree of speed is directly proportional to the intensity of forgetting. So speaking of the sort of the digital gaze, the digital representation of nature, this is a work I made prior to the one about the Suja tree. So I'll again mute the sound. Whoops. So I guess in this work, I'm really interested in this construction of world via stock and found imagery, because I feel like so all of these are stock and found, free to use stock footage and free to use found footage that I scour through the internet, and I use this to sorry, I don't know why this keeps jumping to the next page. So I used to construct this fictional world where there's recreating the context collapse that is the internet of today. Not just the internet, but also the way we exist in this contemporary life. And yeah, it's called hopping, which is a phrase I took from Blue Aspect by Maggie Nelson. And yeah, so if you are interested, all of this work, you can watch these videos in full length on my website. Yes, so this is the work previous to that. It's also a movie image work. And I think they all speak to similar themes. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time. And I just wanted to, yeah.
I was gonna say, don't worry about time.
Okay, cool.
I think we are on. Don't worry about it.
Okay, cool. So yes, I want to end by sharing some new work. It's quite different from what I used to do. So after leaving the RCA, sort of thinking about what kind of artist I want to be and how I want to sort of navigate through making art and life outside of university. I've started to look into doing like art psychotherapy, which is something I hope to do in the future. And I've started working in a autism special school. And this is the body of work I started making after I started working there. And it's very different from what I normally do, which is very sort of heavily research based. I will research for a long time before I start making anything. But this, because I'm working full time and I don't have time to do as much research as I would like or as I used to. So all of these, I will stop playing the video. So all of these drawings and paintings are sort of quick ephemera and reflections of the day I had, inspired by working with the children I work with. A lot of them must kind of abstract portraits of them and of me. And I guess this is a way. It's really interesting that Tony spoke about how each symposium sort of linked to the previous ones. And I feel like this is a way I think about care work as well, to think about the boundary between the time I have when I exist with the children I'm caring and teaching, and also the time when I come back to myself via these quick drawings. Each of them take about 5 minutes. So I use them as a way to come back to myself and to, I don't know, it's really strange. I feel like time stopped existing for myself when I'm working with them. It's a kind of all-consuming, it's an all-consuming kind of feeling. I feel like I cease to exist almost, and time is just suspended in a vacuum, and it moves at a different speed as when I'm by myself and when I'm making art, when I'm doing the drawings. And I don't know where this work is going, but it's I hope to make it a daily thing. It's almost like a visual diary. And yeah, I guess this is where I am at the stage in my practice. I kind of rush through a lot of stuff, but yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Hazel. Lauric, do you want to go?
Yeah, perfect. Great. So let me share my screen. The optimized for video clip option is grayed out. I think it's a setting where you have to restrict it so that it's only one person who can share the screen at the same time or something.
Okay, let me just check that. So for me, it's showing multiple participants can share simultaneously.
Yeah, so maybe if you restrict to
And
one.
who can share? All participants can share. Uh, Is that in the advanced sharing setting?
Maybe.
Okay. Okay, so for me, it's showing that all participants can share.
Yeah.
So, hmm. Okay,
So I
let me
think,
just,
yeah, I think it's like if you change it so that it's not simultaneously that we can share.
okay. Can you try it now? Is it still?
See. Oh yeah, perfect. It's working.
Okay, great,
Okay.
great.
So let me share my screen. Great. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay, great. So full screen and oh wait. Okay, great. Is it working for everyone? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So, hi, my name is Lauric Mahé-Stephenson. So, I'm a French and British artist and filmmaker, and currently based in Paris, but basically between Paris and London. So, in the past, I did my BA in film studies at King's College London, and then I did my MA in contemporary art practice at the Royal College of Arts. And presently, my art practice is kind of a continuation of the work I was doing at the RCA, which is all around queer fairy tales and folklore. So essentially, what I want to do is create a multimedia corpus of different texts, which kind of experiments with writing, illustration, film, and performance. So, uh, so that's it. So basically, kind of to give a bit of a theoretical background first, from where I'm coming from with the fairy tales and kind of how it all interacts with temporality. So a lot of it comes from the research I did for my CHS dissertation during my time at the RCA, which was about queer bodies and monstrosity in contemporary French horror cinema. And so there were three films I was analyzing, and I was using queer theory essentially to read them through a specific lens. So it was looking at Michel Foucault and his idea of heterotopias. Then there's also Lauren Ballard and Michael Warner, who in their essay Sex in Public, they talk about queer counterpublics and how they exist. And then obviously looking at more heavily established in figures of queer theory, such as Judith Butler with her Gender Trouble, and also Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto. And what I found during my research was kind of a common thread between all of these queer theorists, which is all about a question of temporality. In the sense that they all talk about temporality as something that is non-linear and in a way guided by its own temporal logic within the queer realm. So this is actually an idea which was also developed by Jack Halberstam in their 2005 book, In a Queer Time and Place. So in this essay, they draw on a lot of queer theory to then talk about our notion of time and how it's very much separate from the heteronormative way of thinking about temporality. Temporality in the heteronormative system is very linear. It's all about growing up, studying, getting married, buying a house, having children, retiring, and etc. Whereas queer people, on the contrary, their time is very much influenced by their lived experiences. And so it can be things like coming out, gender transitions for some, but also generational events such as the AIDS pandemic, which completely disrupt essentially our this linear train of life and the temporality. So all of these ideas kind of helped me to situate myself and to then bring it back towards the world of fairy tales. So looking at fairy tales, there's also a very powerful idea of temporality that comes into it, in the sense that fairy tales are always mutable, evolving, and they are interpreted as well according to their socio-political context. So their meaning evolves with time, and as does their function. It very much depends on the society, the culture that they're being told through. And at the same time, they keep being repeated. And so when we look, for example, at the Grimm brothers fairy tales, their first edition, which was published, back in the early 19th century, it was very dark, violent, and transgressive. In a way, it was reflecting on the times in which they were written in, and also directed more towards a mature audience. But then, as we saw with time, the editions were adapted and kind of toned down quite a bit to make them more accessible, perhaps, but also maybe aligning it with more traditional and heteronormative values. And so this is actually an idea that as well Marina Warner discusses a lot. So specifically in her book, Once Upon a Time, A Short History of Fairy Tale. So there's a quote that comes from that book, which I find relates quite well with this idea of morphine and temporality. So she says that theories about world literature, of which fairy tale is a fundamental part, emphasize the porousness of borders, geographical and linguistic. No frontier can keep a good story from roaming. It will travel and travel far, and travel back again in a different guise, a changed mood, and above all, a new meaning. So these are the sorts of ideas that she develops in her book. It's this idea that fairy tales are moving and expanding. They are constantly evolving through borders and societies. And this is how essentially fairy tales become a vessel of societal constructs and ideas, but they are also a means to denounce and express inner conflicts and opposition for people to systemic violence. So all of these ideas mean that blending queer theory and fairy tales and all of this theory around it was a way to kind of delve back into this non-linear time and really create these own narratives. So this is where my own practice kind of came in. So I wrote a book of queer fairy tales. It's still in progress, but this was the prototype edition that I presented last year at the graduate show. So it's called The Prince and the Succubus and Other Tales. I also have it here. So a hardcover book, very small. And sorry?
It's so good. I don't know if you can hear me.
Oh, thank you.
Honestly, it's so lovely to see like a physical thing when I love working digital. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but it's so good to see it like that physical thing. It's something I've heard so many people talk about. I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
Congratulations.
Thanks. But yeah, so this physical object of the book obviously has a very strong value as well, in the way that it becomes very much fixed in time as well, because I mean, obviously it can be impacted. The book could burn in a fire or whatever and could disappear, but also it is a physical object that can resist time in a way. And this is kind of this powerful idea that can come from fairy tales. And essentially, the project of queering these fairy tales was for me a desire to explore and reclaim them, and also blend it with traditional folklore, and essentially fighting against the heteronormative binaries. So then I would apply this queer temporality to the text. So in this case, in the book, so far, there were 9 tales that I wrote and illustrated. They were a mix of prose and poetry. And what I wanted to do then was to bend, rework, rewrite, and essentially create new texts. So, for example, one of them was a retelling of Rapunzel, where I wanted to delve back into the origins of a tale where Rapunzel wasn't hidden away by an evil witch. On the contrary, the so-called witch was put her in that tower to protect her from the evil men of the time. And the prince who climbs up the tower, he takes advantage of her when she's not looking and pulls onto her hair, and that's when he rapes her in her tower, and fortunately she gets thrown out of it. And so there's this very dark root to it. So I wanted to go back in my own fairy tale, my own retelling of Rapunzel. I wanted to go back to this root of violence inflicted by men against women. And in the tale, on the contrary, Rapunzel is saved by her lover, who is a woman. And so kind of this sisterhood then that builds from it. So this is where temporality blends again, because it's having this tale which is so known by everyone, which is in our collective subconscious, and then reworking it, changing it in certain aspects. So the main idea as well was to reclaim these fluid characters that defy societal binaries. So they can be characters who are between genders, or it can be unclear. They don't have to be confined within it. And these are then ideas that I could rework of good and evil. So, for example, the succubus, the main character in the book, is a sleep demon who even in Christian mythology was defined as fluid. They could shift genders. So I wanted to rework it. And then what does it mean to have this character? It's a demon in mythology, but at the same time, does it mean that they're intricately evil? And so that's when I can then offer these alternative timelines that correspond more to queer temporality and queer morals. So then the final parts of it, well, not the final because it's still ongoing, but I wanted to then adapt one of the texts into film. So the main tale, The Prince and the Succubus, I adapted it. And so the process of adapting the text into film is already a reworking of temporality, because the script can't be the same. The tale is prose and it's very vast, it's very long. And essentially I had to shorten it down, but also find solutions where that would fit the moving image context. So for that, I drew a lot of inspiration from experimental filmmaking and also a lot of queer filmmakers, such as Kenneth Anger, James Bidgood, or Jan Gonzalez. And so what it means then is that in the film, time is fluid. It's changing and evolving according to the perspective of each character. This is in a way very much related to Deleuze and his idea of the time image, which is how he defined contemporary cinema, which, to be brief, the time image is in opposition to traditional Hollywood cinema, where it was all about the movement image. It was all guided by the action, whereas the time image is directed by affects, by emotion, and also the subconscious mind. And so what was great was I was able to do that during the time at the RCA, where I was able to shoot everything in studio, and we controlled the lighting conditions to create these very abstract notions of day and night. So essentially, there wasn't a clear, obviously you add more lights if you're going to do it during the day, and then less at night. But at the same time, it was all very fluid. There's a lot of movement between the images, and yeah, it's not a temporal state that's fixed in time. So kind of to close my presentation, I wanted to show an extract from the film to kind of give a bit more of an idea. So I'll get onto that now. So hopefully it should work. Oops. Great. So this, yeah, concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Lauric. Great soundtrack.
Yeah, that was Jonathan from CAP, Jonathan Wejnold. He did an amazing work with music. Yeah.
Great. Eileen, do you want to go next?
Yep. Is that okay? Great. That's great. There's thanks you two for sharing your work. There's some really interesting crossovers, and in terms of the previous groups you've brought together, Tony, and what's happening today, it's really exciting, that embedding of ideas and the richness that's building up. So thanks very much for inviting me and to give me the opportunity to talk about what my experience is back at the RCA and what that's now leading to. So I too was there and graduated last year, 2023, but excuse me, I managed to stretch the time courtesy of COVID to 4 years. So I feel like I had an elasticity in terms of the experience of being there, in terms of I started in 2019 and took various segments of leave of absence that enabled a kind of coming back and forth from developing and reflecting on my practice back into the institution. So this was a really unique opportunity for me to have this kind of call and response in terms of what I was doing over this time. So I've got a background actually in textiles. I went to a fine art textiles to goldsmiths, and I'm also really strongly motivated by the politics of environmental activism. And alongside the language of materials and process. So for probably the last 6 years, I've been working particularly in the field of analog, alternative and historical photography and printing processes. And I've developed this into a really embodied and durational approach to my practice using physical and tactile methods that's really process and materials led. And one of the things, this is a question that really guides how I now practice, which is a quote by Donna J. Haraway, which is, "We're the ancestors of the future. What do you want your legacy to be?" So that's really guides what I'm doing. And in that, I'm constantly trying to generate, if it's possible, an effective and materially situated language. And that's really opposed to just an arts for art's sake or for the sake of pure production. And I'm trying to really develop a sustainable artistic practice that's exploring wider relationships and perspectives and entanglements. And I'm really heavily indebted to political theorists like Donna Haraway, who I've just mentioned, and Jane Bennett, and Kate Raworth, who's an economist. And they've guided me in my thinking with regards to adopting an interspecies and speculative way of future thinking in terms of the work that I do. And in that, I now see myself as an ecofeminist, and that's to say that I really position myself in terms of a connection between the exploitation and degradation of the natural world and the subordination and oppression of women. And this seems a really important quote again that comes from Kate Raworth, in that she, in her book Donut Economics, says we need to adopt a different mindset towards care by creating a set of common values that inclines towards regenerative and distributive economics, and by working within the ecological limits of the planet, as well as being relevant to the majority of its inhabitants, both human and non-humans, we can generate a different system of value and worth. Just briefly, I generally work adopting a kind of archaeological approach to the way that I excavate narratives, and these layers become embedded in the work, and I try, a bit like Lauric was saying, to look back at history, certain stories associated with historical sites, as well as the terrain and its current relevance relating to the place. And the work is generally very performative, and I usually involve the public in terms of generating the work. And as a result, the work is ephemeral in nature because it only lasts as long as the generation of it. This is something that I started back when I'd just been at the RCA for about a month when we all had to leave because of COVID. So I started, along with a lot of other people, walking, and decided to develop that as a methodology of studying slowness, and to try and use it as a kind of cartographic device, if you like, of trying to redraw a map of human relationships with a wider environment. So over this time, I set myself 3 different walks. This kind of started unfolding, if you like, over a two-year period between 2019 and 2021. And there was a local walk, which was this one to my woods, where I'd use, very much because of COVID, we all had to become a lot more resourceful. So I'd make my own kit, make my own cameras from waste products in the house, and I would also collect things from the site in terms of making replacement toners for the photographs. And then I had a walk up in the northeast in an industrial coastline area where my family was. And then I had a kind of online exchange that involved walking as well. And these walks became a sort of theoretical stitching together of exchanges between the body, the place, and nature, and offered a wider connection to the ecosystem. So I began really focusing on the materiality of the image, and the prints and the photographs became the sites for communicating material connections, as well as, at the time, trying to counter feelings of alienation and inauthenticity. I felt at that time as well, and that's sort of ongoing really with what's happening as well, this increased depersonalization, along with an increase of the effects of systems, globalization, media, data technology, artificial intelligence. So that, on top of all these exacerbating anxieties concerning the climate crisis, was having an effect on the sense of who I was. And at the time, I was reading a lot of Rebecca Solnit, who again talks about this depersonalization and what those effects are having on society as a whole. So again, another quote, I was looking at a lot of writing by Merleau-Ponty, and that sort of encapsulates my position in terms of we're continually embedded in the flesh of the world, experiencing a constant traffic. I have got another book that I want to mention. This is definitely not an academic tome, but it's something that, again, has had a big impact, and it's always on my periphery. It's something that's been on my shelves for a long time. I'm a parent. I've used it to help parenting when I haven't been able to make. And it's a book by Kerry Smith called Wreck This Journal. And the reason that I kind of have it there on my, like I say, on my periphery, is a way through, she challenges readers through a series of prompts to make mistakes or destroy in order to have a kind of experience a true creative process. And it's a way of encouraging, a way of art making that is trying to get you to get involved with your surroundings, as well as using the actual site of the book as a way of recording these experiences. And I quite like this to go back to that if I get a little bit too rigid when I'm involved in academia, that I can kind of use that as an experimental way of engaging. And it also appeals to my interest that again really affects how I work in the Situationists, who were activists and avant-garde intellectuals in the 50s, set up by Guy Debord, who developed a critique of Western capitalism. And they created radical, a bit like Kerry Smith in some ways, I'm sure she's got her ideas from that, of creating disruptive social situations to facilitate alternative models of interaction between people and their environment. So this became really pivotal in my work and has stayed with me as a method of trying to be in situations that are filled with uncertainty, not just politically, but also the way that I make my work that isn't about overtly creating a commodity. So when I did eventually get back to the RCA and had my final year, I implemented all this thinking and research that I'd done in terms of creating a response to a garden that was near Battersea, which was a Chelsea Physic Garden, which is a small 4-acre site on the banks of the River Thames. This place is a beautiful, beautiful place that's 350 years old, that was originally set up by apothecaries as a medicinal garden, but now is very much in terms of educating and, sorry, just turn the sound off, of through using the lens of horticulture. And I, as this little clip is showing you, took with me as a way of recording my research a old antique Western field camera that is extremely frustratingly slow to use. I make my own dry plates instead of buying film, which I coat myself. And I, yeah, on a good day would maybe take 6 shots. So it was a very, very, very slow process. And out of those 6 shots that I might take on one day, 1 might be good enough to use as a negative. And the other factor that added to this element of time was the fact that, again, during this period away from the RCA during COVID, I taught myself how to make alternative darkroom chemistry from plants that I had in the garden that became an extension of my darkroom, which I set up a temporary one at home. And I'd pretty much decided, because of the pandemic, that I just couldn't justify using commercial product anymore because of the provenance of it. So I was constantly sort of looking back while I was where the materials actually came from, and the vast majority come from petrochemicals, fossil fuel extraction, so I couldn't justify that any longer. And then while I was actually using them, so in the present tense, the toxicity of them also affects me. And then importantly, the waste materials, the effective nature of the waste would then go on to further pollute. So I just, that was the reason why I did that. And I positioned myself here in the propagation area, which was a non-public accessible area in the garden. And the image on the left was, to me, the most important part of that garden, because it was where the compost heaps were. And the compost was tended, the waste, the weeds and all sorts of stuff were put in there that would be turned, and over a 6 months to a year period, this would slowly change from waste matter into a really nutrient rich fine soil that gardeners call black gold. And it was because of the work of the gardeners, but also the microorganisms and the worms and the plant chemistry itself would have this incredible alchemical change. So we've just got, this was a picture of the weeds. This is what I would do with them at home. And it meant that the ecology of the place, as well as the experience, became embedded onto and into the site of the photographs. And with that, also, there's a letting go in terms of expectations of what you're going to get, because there is no way, because it's so uncalibrated and so nuanced a process, depending on the seasonality of the plants or the terroir or where they're gone, ambient temperatures, all sorts of things, the quality of the water, when you harvest, what you harvest, will give very, very different outcomes, if you like, of what a black and white photograph is going to look like at the end of the time. So when I started working this way, it was a beginning of a commitment and purposed intention of making my practice more care-led. And I decided that I was going to follow the principles of a circular economy. So something that's always moving. And, you know, thinking about Donna Haraway, she talks a lot about a becoming with. So it's almost like a verb, and it's about where materials, you know, about affectiveness and about how materials, what happens to them and where they're, how to reinvest them into the biosphere so that you're causing minimal damage and you're working with nature. And this idea of cooperation is really pivotal, and this idea of movement. So the Hanover Principles are a set of statements, like I said, that was actually developed in the year 2000 at an expo, and it was about working sustainably rather with within architecture. So, as I mentioned, I started a photographic garden. So this element of time became really, really stretched, in that I had to grow the plants and then had to wait for the optimal time to harvest them, to convert them, to use them. I also took cuttings, which I would replant. And then I also learned how to chemically neutralize and degrade them, which again could take about 6 months, but it meant that I was creating very much something like the composters, something that I could reinvest in more plants that I would then use within my practice. And so my materials became really, really valuable as a lack of, as a result rather of these processes. And one of the things that, again, as you were talking, Lauric, made me think about value and about this idea of a moving continuum, and the fact that I use these the uncalibrated materials means that I can't offer, they're not a commercial product because I can't offer an archival guarantee. And because of that, I think because they're not tested, they are a latent image, they are continually changing. And so there's this idea of a moving continuum that's held in the surface of the actual photographs and prints. And I've got a couple of examples here. So I really, even though I've been doing this for about 4 years, there's still quite a lot of the plants, quite a lot of the chemistry, and I'm constantly changing things so that it's becoming totally self-sufficient. But I don't know what's going to happen to the surface. Sometimes it degrades or it flakes or stains, fades. So this idea of movement is always embedded in the idea of how the images are seen. And this creates an economy of ideas that has a value outside mainstream economics. I'm just aware that I might be talking a bit too long. How are we doing for time? Is it all right, Tony? Because I will speed up a little bit. I've a few more slides.
I think it's all
Again,
right.
I started using waste packaging, and this is seen as a intervention, a political act, again relating to environmental issues. But again, this idea of time, of things not going away, and the idea of circularity, and that something is always becoming something else. Jane Bennett is very much about this idea of the lively power of matter, and how that highlights these ideas of interconnection and reciprocity. So some of the work that I created at the end of the MA was using all these different factors of replacement darkroom chemicals and replacement film stock and cameras and waste. And I decided to collage together a lot of waste and use this idea of serendipity to make the work by only using what was presented in terms of what I found at home that we used as a family in terms of foodstuffs. So the commercial and vegetable waste that came from that. And these are some of the finished prints that were taken from that propagation area at the Chelsea Physic Garden. That you can see. These were the finished assemblages, and a lot of them, it was a really difficult process because each tiny scrap of waste packaging had to be treated independently before it could be put together. And this, of course, Jane Bennett and Donna Haraway, who I mentioned. Again, the recognition of human participation is in a shared vital materiality. We are all vital materiality, and we are surrounded by it. And so that's really underpinned this urgent need for re-examination of our relationships with the material world, and this idea of a future that we have to live in the now and be present now in order to evaluate what we can't see in a future time, but other consequences of how we're living. And these are part of the works that I made, that again, assemblages of various parts of the garden that all contain traces of the garden. And you've picked 3 people, Tony, who like making books. So I too made a book, and this is one of the final pieces that I want to show you. And this was a clamshell handmade book that I made. And again, uses all the processes that I've talked about, but is also a way of using stories to talk about time, and brings in this ability for people to also have an experience you wouldn't normally handle a photograph. So I've made this by using a recycled paracetamol package that I've hand coated with a light sensitive substance. And then these are one of the slides that I've developed in that I made from the Watson camera from the Chelsea Physic Garden, developed in a plant developer, and then printed it onto the surface of that packaging before reassembling it. And in the paracetamol package is a folded leaflet that everybody gets when they buy medicine, which is called a pill, a public information leaflet. And I reappropriated that by layering stories that relate to the history and the present use and the Western dualisms that surround nature and women. And I rewrote the stories to give some kind of insight. So you've got to interact with the photograph, with the packaging, and have that experience yourself in order to read the story. So that's the end of my presentation. And yeah, thanks very much for letting me talk about it, and also share my love of working this way and of being with something that always becomes something else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eileen. And thank you, Hazel, Lauric, for your really great presentations. There were a couple of things that which just came in my mind when you were like sharing your presentation about like with relation to temporality. Hazel, you're talking about like the displacement of temporality, sort of questioning like the sort of linearity or like the uniformity. You're talking about the mechanical time, sort of, you know, creating your own like fictional world, so sort of understanding your own relationship with temporality. And Lauric, you're talking about again the same thing, you know, sort of displacing temporality with like, you know, creating your own fairy tales. And with Eileen, I noticed that because you work with like plants, and you talked about season. So I just found it interesting that you're sort of working with the sort of the earth and the natural sort of cycles of the earth. And then towards the end of which, when you're talking about like the circularity of it, like the ideas where the sustainability comes in, sort of you were sort of repurposing it. So again, sort of you know, sort of displacing, but yeah, sort of like questioning again, like the sort of breaking that sort of expected life stages of that. So I just really found that really interesting in terms of like how you were sort of defining temporalities with relation to yeah, your own works. So I just want to like open the forum for like discussions. I would like to start with a question, but I mean, if any of you want to like share your thoughts or ask questions, I mean, please feel free. Or yeah, I can share my question so that you have some time to probably think of something. Does anyone have anything to share? Okay, great. So maybe I can ask a question. Just something like sort of going back to again like research within like art practice, you know, because it's something which I really find interesting. You know, because like there are so many like multitudinous ways in which like artists sort of create their own practice. And sort of considering that one of the primary objectives for, you know, doing this sort of symposium is to sort of comprehend this sort of perceived disjuncture from what I understand between practice and theory, and to also explore the possibilities of their conjunctures. I would really like to hear what, you know, Hazel, Lauric, and Eileen would think, what you guys think about what art-based research mean to you in the context of your own practice. And following up on that, probably, how do you situate research within your practice, and what is research even, like what constitutes as research? So probably like walking us through like how you sort of comprehend that sort of, you know, that, you know, maybe there is, yeah, sort of like integration between theory and practice, and how they sort of come about in your work.
I wouldn't mind saying something. I feel like it's fundamental to my practice. However, there has to be a coming and going with that, in terms of, it's a bit like, you know, making work and then having to go away and reflect on it, is that it offers up a new way of looking at the work, but also I'm aware of my audience as well, of who I'm trying to communicate to. So I do find it very, very useful of looking at academic texts, for example, which I was talking a lot about, but also of, you know, doing research in terms of, say, chemistry to get things to work, but also ultimately I'm trying to communicate to an audience using a wide language. So I'm very aware of that in terms of when I'm, you know, like Hazel at the moment, I'm doing a lot of teaching. And so I have to research to a certain degree, but I also want to be able to communicate what I'm doing. I don't know if that answers what you were saying.
Yeah, I also completely agree with you, Eileen, that it's so important to have this constant exchange between research and then putting it into practice, because in a way as well, I think that obviously research is so important, and I think it's important to make all the time for it. But at the same time, when you're creative, it's also important to put it into something physical, because otherwise it all becomes very theoretical. It very much works in the mind. And I think that, yeah, the greatest strength is to have the interaction between the two going on.
If I'm okay, sorry. I mean, I have question. I mean, I'll ask after you. So sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry, I just realized I was muted. Yeah, I feel like I agree with both Ali and Lauric. I feel like it's a constant, non-stop, ever changing, ever evolving relationship. It's kind of like a symbiosis between theoretical research and your creative like practice. And I feel like for me, they really inform each other. You don't necessarily see where it ends up going, but to always find a way, the two strands of being an artist, being a research-based artist, is that the two strands of your work always find ways to inform and help each other grow.
Yeah, I agree. I just read something by Tim Ingold, and he, you know, it kind of validates this idea of grounding and sort of being speculative, going back to the work, just doing. So when you were talking about the book that you made, I thought that was really a lovely example of just parking up what you've been doing. So Tim Ingold, he has this quote about kites. Kites only get their kiteness flying them because of the wind. So it's this idea of interaction, and sometimes it's this balance of parking up the research and just doing the doing. And I've just been going and doing these drawings at the moment in woods, and it kind of is intuitive and it feels right, and it's a very light touch, like the Kerry Smith that I was talking about, and in a way what you've been doing with your book, of just letting go and seeing what happens through doing.
Emma, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. It's been really good to hear what you're all doing and what you're thinking about. I was kind of just thinking about that thing of, I thought it was really interesting what you were saying in terms of the symbiotic relationship between research and practice. But then obviously, not obviously, but in my own practice, it's dance and kind of very ephemeral in that sense. So time becomes a whole thing in itself, and also working with video. And it's this idea that I started looking into of practice as research. And as much as obviously in RCA and places like this, it's really hammered home, like the thing of theory and how much there is that's already been written about and thought about. But then there's all like the body is a site. It contains so much. We have so much knowledge within ourselves. And I find that that can sometimes be bypassed And there was something that Eileen said about the thing of her work not being commercial, and had just said a moment before about it being ephemeral. And in that sense of things like performance art and things like this, it's that question of, does it need to be commercialized in that form? Which also kind of makes me think about that thing of how a book is like an extension of where you've been previously, and like a parking of where it is you're at now. And it's like there's different forms that can allow it to maybe commercials become a different thing, but that kind of pressure, I think, that is often there for artists to create something you can sell that someone else can get, or something like this. And it's like, well, I don't know, so much of that in the moment and in the body and in not just those things, but like that moment in that place in time, thinking in a linear sense, yeah, but that cyclic nature you've also been speaking about is really, really interesting. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. Like, it's really, really good to be here and to just hear what you've been talking about. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Emma. Lauric, you were saying about something about putting theory into practice, and I was just thinking, you were saying that, then theory is just going to be research is going to be just in theory. And I was just like, I just wanted to like understand, like, gauge your understanding on like, is that a problem if research just exists in theory? Or are you just talking from the positionality of being an artist, because you create work?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, especially with what Emma just talked about kind of also the importance of the body. And I think it's very much finding this balance. So maybe, yeah, when I was talking about the research, the importance of putting your research into practice, maybe it was speaking from an artist perspective, but in a way, even for researchers, academics, it's also this idea of putting it into words, putting it into a paper, or it can be a presentation as well. And it can be a performance, it can be something bodily. I think essentially the most important is to have the research applied in any form of expression that works for somebody, because that's when you reappropriate the text. That's when you basically draw from all your different inspirations, your different researchers, all the different strands. And once you manage to put them all together, that's where you kind of make your own meaning and you create something new. And doesn't mean that you're going to create a new foundational theoretical text in a way, but it's also in a way your own interpretation of it, your own evolution of these ideas. So yeah, and that's definitely something that I personally apply a lot. It's, yeah, for example, with the fairy tale zone, I spent a lot of the first year of VMA doing a lot of research, both for the CHS, but also for my own project, and drawing from thousands and thousands of writers, so many times picking up from other people as well, references, films, books, theorists, and yeah, and then kind of afterwards taking all of that in and just putting it all into practice. But obviously, yeah, everybody works in different ways. But I know that for me personally, it's very much having this whole web, which then closes into one circle afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, they say, don't they? No man is an island, but you're drawing on other people's experiences. And, they do bang on quite rightly, but it is about position and voice, isn't it? And that is where you get your position and your voice from, by looking at other experiences and, bringing your own to it. And that's what comes out of it. I feel like without that, it's a very thin offering.
Yeah, so Eileen, you were saying about sort of like doing research and then sort of putting it away, keeping it away, and then going out and like practicing it. I also wonder if you have considered practice as a research modality in itself, or like how do you understand researching? Is it just like, text-based research? Is that how you understand research?
No, I think that's what you've just said. Absolutely. So research, of course, is the academic side of it, but research to me is the thinking through the making, and that is fundamental for me, and I definitely see that as research. I'm just thinking as well, this might be something different to what you've just said, but about a storyteller. He's called Dr. Martin Shaw, and he talks really beautifully about this idea of retelling stories that can be retelling research, but he puts them in different time frames, and he calls it flesh memory and bone memory, and there's one other memory that I can't remember. And the bone memory is like old time, and through storytelling, Lauric's probably come across that, and Hazel, of course, is cultural memory and how that becomes translated and normative. And then you've got flesh memory, which is the more bodily perceptions and how that all gets mashed up. And that's, you know, kind of becomes embedded in the type of work that you do, that can be substantiated through research, but is nonetheless always there, kind of in the distance, that is effective.
I also wonder
I
if
think,
any, sorry, go on.
sorry. Yeah, I think I agree with all of what you said. I feel like as an artist slash researcher, it's very important to acknowledge the sort of lived experience and the embodied knowledge that we have. And I feel like it's also research. It's not just theoretical or text-based. I feel like being informed by knowledge that's outside of the confine of the duality of the mind and the body is it's a very important aspect for any creative practices.
Is it all right to jump in?
Yes, yes, of course.
I just wanted to say it's really interesting what you were saying there, Hazel. I really loved your presentation as well, by the way. The thing of the mind-body duality fallacy, and this kind of mistaken idea that they're separate when in fact they're completely part of the whole. Obviously, they operate in different ways, but like there's parts of the body, like for instance, if the body knew that the eyes existed, it would destroy them. But in order for the system to work, it has to know that it's not there. And this idea of, like, it was Ken Robinson who said in that talk, how schools kill creativity, that we tend to focus more and more upwards on the body and then over to one side when people are in school. And I think that this thing of, like, in terms of arts education and what serves the arts education as a business, and this kind of, I love the thing of exploring theory. I think it can be really fascinating. And it's something that I can often get lost in. I used to start my creative process with research first and then practice. So it's just interesting in that sense of, like, if we were to start where we're at, like literally the only vessel we have, the only thing we can really know, in our lived experience and where we are now, whatever that might be, and then from there it moves outwards and then kind of comes back. It's like, it's almost like, again, playing with that, I guess, the temporality of that typical process, maybe reversing it, playing around, like, you know, taking things out, putting things in. But this is where I think that thing of, there's a richness and there's something that we all know within ourselves that no one else can know the way that we do, or can do the way that we do. And I think it's great, and it's really valuable to look outwards at all of these external aspects of research and what other people have done. But also it makes me think of artists that we hold in such high esteem and regard, that may have never picked up a book on theory, but have created works that speak to us through the heart. And this is again through the thing of body and effect and the situationist theory. There's so much that you've talked about today, and this is the first thing I've come to do that's been really bang on, like what I'm interested in since I've left RCA, if I remember rightly. But anyway, it's so good to be part of this and hear these different kinds of approaches and ways that you're thinking. Like with you, Hazel, I thought it was really interesting, the book that you were creating, the sketchbook that you'd done. That for me links into more your lived experience, your actual embodied moment that you were in. That was something I thought was really interesting. But like with all of you, you've all managed to approach this from very different ways. But yeah, it's just so good to be here. Thank you so much. It's really great, all the things you've been making me think about. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you for being here. Um, I also wonder if you guys have something to ask or comment on each other's presentation or work.
I'd love to do a collaboration. I think it'd be really interesting.
I think that's also what this space is for, you know, so that you can sort of gauge or sort of pick up interests with others.
I have to say, one of the things I'm very aware of my privilege also in what I do. So I am very mindful of that, and I'm just trying to redress that through what I do, and that's why the subject is so important to me, and the aspect of time, which I think we all have in our practices of trying to tell stories for other people. So you've got that ongoingness, and dare I say, it's trying to adopt a sort of generosity and outward lookingness to give and put our research somewhere where it's going to have some effect somewhere else. But that surely is the role of art making, or the type of art making we do.
I really loved Hazel's book, what you're talking about, you know, working with disabled individuals. You're talking about like care, and I really loved sort of that sort of connection between sort of and you're talking about getting lost in a sort of you know, sort of losing that understanding of time. I just love that connection. And I also saw that saw a green screen in one of the slides that you shared. And I was just like thinking about like the use of green screens, right, in like films and moving image work, and how that sort of displaces by itself time as well as space. So that sort of spatio-temporal displacement of spatio-temporality. And with Lauric, you're talking about like sort of transforming text to film. So really interesting to see that sort of you know, how that notion of temporality changes through like mediums, with mediums, across mediums. Is that something that you consciously think about when you're creating work?
Yeah, completely. I mean, yeah, especially you were talking as well, resonating with Hazel's work and like the image of the green screen. I mean, that's definitely, I think, something that all contemporary artists need to be aware of when working with different mediums, is that they are ever evolving and ever changing. And what recently there was the whole AI video generated videos, which made quite a bit of a buzz. I personally found them quite terrible. I was like, okay, there's still a bit of time, but still, like, obviously very impressive. And I think that's why, yeah, we need to be so conscious about the mediums we're working with, and yeah, basically work within their restraints. And the biggest restraint that there is, and because it used to be physical limits, but more and more they are being broken. So yeah, it's definitely time. We map in time and temporality according to different mediums, because yeah, they can't translate in the exact same way each time. So yeah.
And Eileen, like the materials that you work with, you know, the plants and working in the garden, it's really interesting how like the material in itself are like temporal materials. Also you mentioned that your background is in textiles. You know, my background is also in textiles. I also wonder, like, is there some crossover between the way you, because it's both are like very tactile materials, you know, even collecting plants, working with different materials, and also textiles, right? So I'm just like curious about that sort of
Yeah, definitely.
crossovers.
I definitely feel that I'm still using the language of stitch. So I used to use a lot of print and hand stitch, and I find that language is still embedded in what I do in terms of that slowness. I also really always liked the kind of political aspects that were related to textiles and their function, and in terms of their functionality as well. So that's something that, but definitely the haptic. I think, you know, we've been talking quite a bit about dualisms and the role of the body, and you've got, you know, it's massive areas, all this, isn't it? But, you know, you talk about Western patriarchy and the way that things are valued because of their association. So there's this, you know, the terms in terms of ways of seeing, vision is always seen as the top of your way. I've lost the word that I wanted to use. So
dominant
exactly.
Perception.
Yeah. And then, you know, I talked about ecofeminism and the, you know, the relationship, especially with, you know, domesticity, cloth, clothing, the way work is made, and the connections between the female and nature as well. So
thank you. So I'm aware of time, and we are it's been 1 hour 30 minutes, so it's time to bring the session to a close. I just wonder if any of you had any like closing remarks, or if no. Okay, so all right. So so the recording for today's session would be released in a day or so, or I mean, it will be on YouTube. So if you watch on the Instagram Critical Symposium, you can see updates like when it's going to be released. Also, yeah, so for the next month's forum, yeah, again, all the updates would be on the Instagram. So I just want to thank Hazel, Lauric, and Eileen for taking the time to be here and for sharing their work, and for all the other participants who are here, you know, taking time from your day, being here, and also like contributing to the discussion. So yeah, so probably hope to see you all next month. So thank you for being here. All right, see you next month. Thank you.
thanks, Tony.
Hi,
Thank you.
thanks.
Be amazing. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.